The member for Goldstein.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Defence Industry representing the Minister for Employment. Will the minister outline to the House why it is important that employer and employee organisations always act in the best interests of their members? And is the minister aware of alternative approaches?
The Minister for Defence Industry representing the Minister for Employment.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I see my friends on the other side are still standing up for John Setka, as usual, Mr Speaker. They like trashing public servants who work hard. They like trashing the public servants who put themselves, in fact, their bodies on the line against the CFMEU, and they stand up for John Setka instead, Mr Speaker. Yesterday, Mr Speaker, the federal court handed down record fines against the CFMEU of $2.4 million, Mr Speaker. $2.4 million. And the judge at the centre of that decision, Judge Jeffrey Flick, said, "It's not difficult. It is difficult, if not impossible, to envisage any worse conduct than that pursued by the CFMEU, Mr Speaker. The jury is so in on the CFMEU, and yet still the Leader of the Opposition refuses to expel the CFMEU from the Labor Party, and he continues to take their donations. Their donations from the CFMEU, but since he's been the leader, now total $8 million, Mr Speaker. So the CFMEU has very, very deep pockets. They have deep pockets to be able to bankroll the Labor Party,
the Minister will resume his seat for a second. I couldn't have been more clear with the member for Lyons at the start of question time. He can leave under 94A. He's clearly chosen to be ejected. The Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. So they clearly are pleased to bankroll the Labor Party in Victoria, and they're also quite happy to pay these fines. They've been fined again and again and again. As Judge Jeffrey Flick said, the CFMEU has repeatedly sought to place itself above the law. The CFMEU's conduct exposes a cavalier disregard for the prior penalties imposed by this court. And so, Mr Speaker, it's the responsibility of the leaders in Australia to lead by example and to say to the CFMEU, you're not welcome in the Labor Party until you get your act together, Mr Speaker. Bob Hawke was tough enough, and John Cain were tough enough to stand up to the BLF. The Leader of the Opposition allows the CFMEU into every single forum of the Labor Party in Victoria, into their pre-selections, into their policy-setting processes, into the governance of the Labor Party. The CFMEU and the Labor Party are in lockstep, Mr Speaker. One of the union leaders, one of the CFMEU leaders who was fined yesterday, or their union was fined yesterday, at the Barangaroo site in Sydney, described the investigators from the Fair Work Commission as being worse than pedophiles, Mr Speaker. Worse than pedophiles. A union leader said that a public servant doing his job was worse than a pedophile. And these are the kind of people the Leader of the Opposition stands up for. He's now got the cash for stacks scandal in Victoria to deal with, Mr Speaker, the cesspit that is the Labor Party in Victoria, and this Leader of the Opposition sits on top of that cesspit.